Yo, what is going on, guys? SMH Super Mario Hoops back with some more hoops, and today we are hopping right back into another video as a part of my top 50 list in NBA history. And today we got none other than Larry Bird, also known as Larry Legend. Now, where do I got Larry Bird on my all-time list? I got him ranked in the top 5, right at number 5. Now, before we hop into this video, gonna need you guys to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well so that you get updates every time I post a new upload. And I think without further ado, we can just hop right into Larry Bird. Now, over the course of his career, he was a 12-time NBA All-Star. This included every year from 1980 until 1992, with the exception of 1989. Now, over his career, he was a 10-time member of the All-NBA teams, 9 times in which he was first-team All-NBA from 1980 until 1988, and then he made second-team All-NBA in 1990. In fact, he was a 3-time MVP every year from 1984 to 1986, and he's the last person to do so in a three-peat fashion. He's also a 3-time NBA All-Defensive second-team member every year from 1982 until 1984, a 2-time member of the 50-40-90 club in 1987 and 1988, and he's also a 3-time NBA champion in 1981, 1984, and 1986. With the last 2 years of those 3, he won Finals MVP. Now, in terms of MVP shares, he received votes on 12 different seasons. In 9 of these, he was a top 5 finisher, and this is actually every year from 1979 until 1988. And he was an 8-time top 3 finisher. 4 times he was the runner-up in 1981 to Dr. J, 1982 to Moses Malone, 1983 to Moses Malone, and then also 1988 to Michael Jordan. And then, of course, he was a 3-time winner in the mid-80s. Now, when looking at his runner-up seasons, I realistically don't think he deserved any of those. I mean, the best one you could argue against was in 1981 when he was a runner-up to Dr. J. But regardless of that, he still did win 3 MVPs, and those 3 peak seasons for Bird, I would argue that might just be the second greatest peak in NBA history. I mean, over those years, he averaged 26 points per game, 10 rebounds a game, about 7 assists, 2 steals, a block, on about 50, 39, 89 shooting splits, and only missed a combined 5 games. Over that stretch, he was also an all-defensive level player that even received a first-place vote for the award in 1984. He led the league in win shares 2 of those 3 seasons, led the league in win share per 48 in 2 of those 3 seasons, led the NBA in offensive win shares in 1 of those seasons, and then in defensive win shares the other 2. He led the league in PER for 2 of those seasons, led in offensive box plus minus for 2 of those seasons, and he led the NBA all 3 of these seasons in BPM and VORP rating as well. And then this was topped off by 3 straight finals appearances, 2 of which he won, as well as being named the finals MVP. I mean, that is an all-time great level peak in 3 seasons. But now let's move on to some all-time stat rankings. 24.3 points per game is 17th all-time. 10 rebounds a game is 51st all-time and the second highest for a small forward behind only Elgin Baylor. 88.6% from the free throw line is 13th in NBA history. A 23.5 PER is 20th all-time. 145.8 win shares is 25th all-time. 86.8 offensive win shares is 31st all-time. 59 defensive win shares is 30th all-time. A .203 win share per 48 rating is 23rd all-time. A 6.7 box plus minus is 7th all-time. A 5.1 offensive box plus minus is 10th all-time. And then he places 14th in NBA history in terms of VORP rating at 77.2. Now, a lot of these are based on totals, longevity, and of course Bird did have a shorter career than a lot of these players because of injury. But now let's move on to Bird's playoff career. Now, from stats alone, he has a pretty similar but also a little bit of a drop-off in per-game stats and advanced analytics. However, it doesn't mean that he was still bad. I mean, 20 points per game in 25 of 32 playoff series, 25 points per game in 14 series, and 2 series above 30 points per game. He had 10 rebounds per game in 17 of 32 series and dropped his most rebounds per game in a playoff series in 1981 in the finals when Cedric Maxwell shockingly took home the Finals MVP award, and 5 assists per game in 27 of 32 playoff series, where he averaged 7 assists per game in more than half of his playoff series as well. But in his first 4 series of his career, Bird was highly efficient from every metric except the 3-point shot in his first series, and averaged about 24, 12, and 5 over those series too. And after being down 3-1 to the 76ers 76ers in the 1981 Eastern Conference Finals, Bird averaged about 27 points, 13 rebounds, 5 assists, over 3 steals, 2 blocks on 46 191 shooting splits to complete a 3-1 comeback and bring his team to the NBA Finals. And in the 1981 NBA Finals, as I said, Maxwell won Finals MVP, even though Bird, you could argue, was snubbed. I mean, Maxwell was shooting 61% true shooting, which is very impressive, especially when you consider Bird only shot 46% true shooting. And Maxwell did put up 2 more points per game. However, Bird also averaged 6 more rebounds per game and a career high, like we said before, 15.3 for a series, along with 7 assists per game, which was over 4 more than Maxwell, while Bird outplayed Maxwell in the closest game in the series, which was Game 1, and the closeout game in Game 6. So yes, I know Maxwell was more efficient, but one could argue that this belonged to Bird for impacting so many major facets of the game. But let's look at his 3 peak years, where he went to 3 straight finals, won 3 straight MVPs, and won 2 of them in 1984 and 1986. And he was the Finals MVP for both, as we mentioned. But over these 3 playoff runs, Bird averaged 26.5 points per game, about 10 rebounds per game, 6.5 assists, 2 steals, 1 block on 50, 38, 89 shooting splits, while being efficient on the defensive end as well. He was by far the best player in the 1984 and 1986 finals, and in 1985, he was outperformed by Kareem and arguably Kevin McHale, though. However, in his prime, he still outperformed Magic head-to-head in these series, as well as Hakeem Olajuwon in 1986, which is very impressive. He would have another run left in him in 1987, where he averaged 28, 10, and 8 in the conference playoffs before the finals. And I know we recognize Larry Bird as an elite clutch player because he was, but he made one of the most clutch defensive plays in Game 5 of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals against Detroit on top of his 36 points, 12 rebounds, 9 assists on 59% true shooting. He stole the inbounds pass and fed Dennis Johnson for a layup to win Game 5 and avoid the 3-2 hole, because Detroit came out and won Game 6, so that likely would have been season. And in Game 7, Bird put up 37 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 blocks on 65% true shooting to bring his team back to the NBA Finals once again. And in this finals, I mean, Magic was just too good. As we mentioned in 1984 and 1985 for the finals, Bird was the better player, but in 1987, Magic got the better edge. And it makes sense. I mean, both were regular season MVPs in those respective years. And in 1988 was kind of his final chance before injuries started to hit, where Detroit beat them in a revenge series of the Eastern Conference Finals. Bird was pretty effective, although not as efficient as he would like to be. The rest is kind of a wash. I mean, Bird was great in the 1990 series and in spurts for the 1991 playoffs, but by 1992, the injuries were shown to affect his play as well. So when it comes to discussing Larry Bird for an all-time placement, I would say he is underrated, just as I did with his rival Magic Johnson. I mean, I don't think people realize this rivalry somewhat saved the NBA. I mean, in the 70s, the league showed like it was in a bad place. I mean, even the 60s was more memorable and more box office worthy than the 1970s. But the reason I rank Bird over Magic specifically is because here's what we know. I mean, both of them were proven winners, multiple times in fact, of titles, of MVPs, and so on. Magic was the better passer, but Bird was still a really good passer, and to be honest, the only small forward of all time that holds a candle to Bird's passing ability is LeBron. Outside of that, Bird would pretty much be the consensus best forward at that spot in terms of passing, and still probably is a top 15 passer of all time. Defensively, Bird was definitely better. I mean, for one, he was all defensive for several years while Magic wasn't, and even though people love to make somewhat a racist narrative of white guys that are slow, that wasn't the case for people blowing by Larry Bird on the defensive end, at least nowhere near the extent of when they did with Magic Johnson and the people that he guarded. Bird is also the better scorer and the better shooter. I think we can both agree on that. Bird is also shown to be the more clutch player, and yeah, in 1985 the Lakers won that series, but again, Bird was still better than Magic in that series. The other two series, I mean, they were each the best in one of them when they went head-to-head. And I also just think that Bird's peak was a little bit more dominant and simply better than Magic's. And the longevity argument isn't really there for either, because while Bird retired prematurely with injuries, I mean, Magic got HIV in 1991 and was forced into retirement too. It's definitely kind of close, and that's why Magic is literally right behind Bird on my list, but I just prefer Larry Legend. And to be honest, I would even be more apt to put Bird higher. I mean, in terms of his peak, he could rank second on an all-time list, and in this top 5, I think pretty much everybody from 2 to 5, you can alter what you value most in ranking players to make a case as for why each of them should be number 2 all-time. For Bird, I would say his peak. I mean, he did everything on the court at an elite level. He was efficient, a great defender. The other 3 players in that class above might have had stronger strengths, but weaker weaknesses by far. But the reason I couldn't rank Bird higher is because his longevity, for one, which is unfortunate, and the fact that he wasn't even the best player on his team every series. I mean, I mentioned how in the 1985 finals, McHale was probably better and might have been finals MVP if they won. And in the 1987 NBA finals, or even the 1988 Eastern Conference finals, one could argue the same thing, that McHale was better. I know I mentioned how in the 1981 finals, where Bird arguably deserved finals MVP over Maxwell, but at the end of the day, he didn't get it. And the idea of being the most dominant player on your team every single playoff matchup, it tells me that you were never carried and that you always showed up when it mattered most. And sadly, there's only one guy in NBA history who can even say that, where he can even say that it was not just for his own team, but the series in general. And I think you guys have a pretty good idea who I'm talking about. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about Larry Bird. I feel like not enough people give him the credit he deserves nowadays, and they kind of just slander his name. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for me. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm out. Peace.